This is the public domain book on the cross, a romance of the Passion Play at Oberammergau by Wilhelmine von Hillern. Chapter 18. The Marriage. On a wooded height, hidden in the heart of the forests of the Bavarian highlands, stood an ancient hunting castle, the property of the Wildenau family. A steep mountain path led up to it, and at its feet, like a stone sea, stretched the wide, dry bed of a river, a Greece, as it was called in that locality. Only a few persons knew the way. To the careless glance the path seemed wholly impassable. Bare, rugged cliffs towered like a wall around the hunting castle on its mossy height, harmonizing in melancholy fashion with the white sea of stone below, which formed a harsh foreground to the dreary scene. Ever and anon a stag emerged from the woods, crossing the Greece with elastic tread, the brown silhouette of its antlers sharply relieved against the colourless monotony of the landscape. The hind came forward from the opposite side, slowly, reluctantly, with nostrils vibrating. And the report of a rifle echoed from beyond the riverbed. The antlers drooped, the royal creature fell upon its knees, then rolled over on its back. Its huge antlers, flung backward in the death agony, were thrust deep down among the loose pebbles. The hind had fled, the poacher seized his prey. A slender rill of blood trickled noiselessly through the stones. Then everything was once more silent and lifeless. This was the hiding place where, for 7 years, Countess Wildenau had hidden the treasury filched from the cross, the rock sepulchre in which she intended to keep the god whom the world believed dead. Built close against the cliff, half concealed by an overhanging precipice, the castle seemed to be set in a niche. Shut out from the sunshine by the projecting crag which cast its shadow over it even at noonday, it was so cold and damp that the moisture trickled down the walls of the building, and, moreover, was surrounded by that strange atmosphere of wet moss and rotting mushrooms which awakens so strange a feeling when, after a hot walk, we pause to rest in the cool courtyard of some ruined castle, where our feet sink into wet masses of mouldering brown leaves which for decades no busy hand has swept away. It seems as if the sun desired to associate with human beings. Where no mortal eyes behold its rays, it ceases to shine. It does not deem it worth while to penetrate the heaps of withered leaves, or the tangle of wild vines and bushes, or the veil of cobwebs and lime dust which, in the course of time, accumulates in heaps in the masonry of a deserted dwelling. As we see by a child's appearance whether or not it has a loving mother, so the aspect of a house reveals whether or not it is dear to its owner. And as a neglected child drags out a joyless existence, so a neglected house gradually becomes cold and inhospitable. This was the case with the deserted little hunting seat. No foot had crossed its threshold within the memory of man. What could the Countess Wildenau do with it? It was so remote, so far from all the paths of travel, so hidden in the woods that it would not even afford a fine view. It stood as an outpost on the chart containing the location of the Wildenau estates. It had never entered the owner's mind to seek it out in this, far less in reality. Every year an architect was sent there to superintend the most necessary repairs, because it was not fitting for a Wildenau to let one of these family castles go to ruin. This was all that was done to preserve the building. The garden gradually ran to waste, and became so blended with the forest that the boughs of the trees beat against the windows of the edifice and barred out like a green hedge the last straggling sunbeams. A castle for a sleeping beauty, but without the sleeping princess. Then fate willed that a blissful secret in its owner's breast demanded just such a hiding place in which to dream the strangest fantasy ever imagined by woman, since Danae rested in the embrace of Jove. Madeleine von Wildenau sought and found this forgotten spot in her chart, and, with the energy bestowed by the habit of being able to accomplish whatever we desire, she discovered a secret ford through the Greece, known only to a trustworthy old driver, and no one was aware of Countess Wildenau's residence when she vanished from society for days. There were rumours of a romantic adventure or a religious ecstasy into which the Ammergau Passion Play had transported her years before. She had set off upon her journey to the promised land directly after, and as no sea is so wide, no mountain so lofty that gossip cannot find its way over them, it even made its way from the Holy Sepulchre to the drawing-rooms of the capital. A gentleman, an acquaintance of so-and-so, had gone to the Orient, and in Jerusalem, at the Holy Sepulchre, met a veiled lady, who was no other than Countess Wildenau. There would have been nothing specially remarkable in that. But at the lady's side knelt a gentleman who bore so remarkable a resemblance to the pictures of Christ that one might have believed it was the risen Lord himself who, dissatisfied with heaven, had returned repentant to his deserted resting place. How interesting, The imagination of society, thirsting for romance, naturally seized upon this bit of news with much eagerness. Who could the gentleman with the head of Christ be, save the Amergau Christ? This agreed with the sudden interruption of the Passion Play that summer on account of the illness of the Christ, as the people of Amergau said, who perfectly understood how to keep their secrets from the outside world. But as they committed the imprudence of occasionally sending their daughters to the city, one and another of these secrets of the community, more or less distorted, escaped through the dressing rooms of the mistresses of these Amergau maids. Thus here and there a flickering ray fell upon the Amergau catastrophe. The Christ was not ill. He had vanished, run away, with a lady of high rank. What a scandal! Then lo! One day Countess Wildenau appeared, after a journey of 3 years in the East, somewhat absent-minded, a little disposed to assume religious airs, but without any genuine piety. Religion is not to be obtained by an indulgence of religious erotic rapture with its sweet delusions. It can be obtained only by the hard labour of daily self-sacrifice, of which a nature like Madeleine von Wildenau's has no knowledge. So she returned, somewhat changed, yet only so far as that her own ego, which the world did not know, was even more potential than before. But she came alone. Where had she left her pallid Christ? All inquiries were futile. What could be said? There was no proof of anything. And besides, proven or not, what charge would have overthrown Countess Wildenau? That would have been an achievement for which even her foes lacked perseverance. It is very amusing when a person's moral ruin can be effected by a word carelessly uttered. But when the labour of producing proof is associated with it, people grow good-natured from sheer indolence. Let the victim go, and seek an easier prey. This was the case with the Countess Wildenau. Her position remained as unshaken as ever, nay, the charm of her person exerted an influence even more potent than before. Was it her long absence, or had she grown younger? No matter. She had gained a touch of womanly sweetness which rendered her irresistible. In what secret mine of the human heart and feeling had she garnered the rays which glittered in her eyes like hidden treasures on which the light of day falls for the first time? When a woman conceals in her heart a secret joy, men flock around her, with instinctive jealousy, all the more closely. They would fain dispute the sweet right of possession with the invisible rival. This is a trait of human nature. But one of a number did so consciously, not from a jealous instinct, but with the full, intense resolve of unswerving fidelity. The prince. With quiet caution, and the wise self-control peculiar to him, he steadily pursued his aim. Not with professions of love, he was only too well aware that love is no weapon against love. On the contrary, he chose a different way, that of cold reason. So long as she is aglow with love, she will be proof against any other feeling. She must first be cooled to the freezing point, then the chilled bird can be clasped carefully to the breast and given new warmth. It would be long ere that point was reached, but he knew how to wait. Meanwhile, he drew the Countess into a whirl of the most fascinating amusements. No word, no look betrayed the still hopeful lover. With the manner of one who had relinquished all claims, but was too thoroughly a man of the world to avoid an interesting woman because he had failed to win her heart, he again sought her society after her return. Had he betrayed the slightest sign of emotion, he would have been repulsive in her present mood. But the perfect frankness and unconcern with which he played the old friend, and nothing more, made his presence a comfort, nay, even a necessity of life. So he became her inseparable companion, her shadow, and by the influence of his high position stifled every breath of slander, which floated from Amergau to injure his beautiful friend. During the first months after her return she had the whim, as she called it, of retiring from society and spending more time upon her estates. But the wise caution of the prince prevented it. For heaven's sake, don't do that. Will you give free play to the rumours about your Amergau episode and the pilgrimage to Jerusalem connected with it, by withdrawing into solitude and thus leaving the field to your slanderers, that they may disport at will in the deserted scenes of your former splendour? This, he argued, is the very time when you must take your old position in society, or you will be, pardon my frankness, a fallen star. The Countess evidently shrank from the thought. Or, have you some castle in the air whose delights outweigh the world in your eyes? He asked with relentless insistence. This time the Countess flushed to the fair curls which clustered around her forehead. Since that time the drawing-rooms of the Wildenau Palace had again been filled with the fragrance of roses, lighted and adorned with glowing oriental magnificence, and the motley tide of society, amid vivacious chatter, flooded the spacious apartments. Glittering with diamonds, intoxicated by the charm of her own beauty, whose power she had not tested for years, the Countess was the centre of all this splendour. While in the lonely hunting seat beyond the pathless Greece, the solitary man whom she had banished thither vainly awaited, his wife. The leaves in the forest were turning brown for the 6th time since their return from Jerusalem. The autumn gale was sweeping fresh heaps of withered leaves to add to the piles towering like walls around the deserted building. The height was constantly growing colder and more dreary. The drawing rooms below were continually growing warmer, the Palace Wildenau, with its Persian hangings and rugs and cosy nooks behind gay screens, daily became more thronged with guests. People drew their chairs nearer and nearer the blazing fire on the hearth, which cast a rosy light upon pallid faces and made weary eyes sparkle with a simulated glow of passion. The intimate friends of the Countess Wildenau, reclining in comfortable armchairs, were gathered in a group, the gentlemen resting after the fatigues of hunting, or the autumn manoeuvres, the ladies after the first receptions and balls of the season, which are the more exhausting before habit again asserts its sway, to say nothing of the question of toilets, always so trying to the nerves at these early balls. What is to be done at such times? It is certainly depressing to commence the season with last year's clothes, and one cannot get new ones because nobody knows what styles the winter will bring. Parisian novelties have not come, so one must wear an unassuming toilette of no special style in which one feels uncomfortable and casts aside afterwards, because one receives from Paris something entirely different from what was expected. So the ladies chatted, and Countess Wildenau entered eagerly into the discussion. She understood and sympathized with these woes, though now, as the ladies said, she really could not chime in, since she had a store of valuable oriental stuffs and embroideries which would supply a store of exclusive toilettes for years. Only people of inferior position were compelled to follow the fashions. Great ladies set them, and the costliness of the material prevented the garments from appearing too fantastic. A Countess Wildenau could allow herself such bizarre costumes. She had a right to set the fashions, and people would gladly follow her if they could, but 2 requirements were lacking: on one side, the taste, on the other, the purse. The Countess charmingly waved her friends envious compliments, but her thoughts were not on the theme they were discussing. Her eyes wandered to a crayon picture hanging beside the mantelpiece, the picture of a boy who had the marvellous beauty of one of Raphael's cherubs. "What child is that?" asked one of the ladies who had followed her glance. "Don't you recognize it?" replied the Countess with a dreamy smile. "It is the Christ in the picture of the Sistine Madonna." "Why, how very strange. If you had a son, one might have thought it was his portrait. It resembles you so much." "Do you notice it?" the Countess answered. "Yes, that was the opinion of the artist who copied the picture. He gave it to me as a surprise." She rose and took another little picture from the wall. "Look, this is a portrait of me when I was 3 years old. There really is some resemblance." The ladies all assented, and the gentleman, delighted to have an opportunity to interrupt the discussion of the fashions, came forward and noticed with astonishment the striking likeness between the girl and the boy. "It is really the Christ-child in the Sistine Madonna, very exquisitely painted," said the prince. "By the way, cousin," cried a sharp, high voice over Prince Emil's shoulder, a voice issuing from a pair of very thin lips shaded by a reddish moustache, "do you know that you have the very model of this picture on your own estates?" The Countess, with a strangely abrupt, nervous movement, pushed the copy aside and hastily turned to replace her own portrait on the wall. The gentleman tried to aid her, but she rejected all help, though she was not very skilful in her task, and consequently was compelled to keep her back turned to the group a long time. "It is possible. I cannot remember," she replied, while still in this position. "I cannot know the children of all my tenants." "Yes," the jarring voice persisted, "it is a boy who is roaming about near your little hunting castle." Madeleine von Wildenau grew ghastly pale. "Apropos of that hunting box," the gentleman added, "he was one of the disinherited Wildenaus. You might let me have it, cousin. I'll confess that I've recently been looking up the old rat's nest. Schlierheim will lease his preserves beyond the government forests, but only as far as your boundaries, and there is no house. My brother and I would hire them if we could have the old Wildenau hunting box. We are ready to pay you the largest sum the thing is worth. You know it formerly belonged to our branch of the family, and your husband obtained it only 40 years ago. At that time it was valueless to us, but now we should like to buy it again." The Countess shivered and ordered more wood to be piled on the fire. She had unconsciously drawn nearer to Prince Emily as if seeking his protection. Her shoulder touched his. She was startlingly pale. "The recollection of her husband always affects her in this way," the prince remarked. "Well, we will discuss the matter some other time, belle cousine," said Herr Wildenau, sipping a glass of chartreuse which the servant offered. Prince Emile's watchful gaze followed the little scene with the closest attention. "Did you not intend to have the little castle put in order for your father's residence, as the city air does not agree with him in his present condition?" he said with marked emphasis. "Yes, certainly. We were speaking of it a short time ago," stammered the Countess. "Besides, I am fond of the little castle. I should not wish to sell it." "Ah, you are fond of it. Pardon me. That is difficult to understand. I thought you set no value upon it. The whole place is so neglected." "That is exactly what pleases me. I like to have it so," replied the Countess in an irritated tone. "It does not need to have everything in perfect order. It is a genuine forest idyll." "A forest idyll?" repeated the cousin. Ah, yes, that's a different matter. Pardon me. Had I known it, I would not have alluded to the subject." His keen grey eyes glittered with a peculiar light as he kissed her hand and took his leave. The others thought they must now withdraw also, and the Countess detained no one. She was evidently very weary. The prince also took leave, for the sake of etiquette, but he whispered with an expression of friendly anxiety, "I will come back soon." And he kept his promise. An hour had passed. Madeleine von Wildenau, her face still colourless, was reclining on a divan in a simple home costume. Prince Emile's first glance sought the little table on which stood the crayon picture of the infant Christ. It had vanished. The Countess followed his look and saw that he missed it. Their eyes met. The prince took a chair and sat down by her side, as if she were an invalid who had just sustained a severe operation and required the utmost care. He himself was very pale. Gently arranging the pillows behind her, he gazed sympathizingly into her face. "Why did you not tell me this before?" he murmured, almost inaudibly, after a pause. "All this should have been very differently managed. Prince, how could I suppose that you were so generous, so noble?" She could not finish the sentence. Her eyes fell, the beautiful woman's face crimsoned with shame. He gazed earnestly at her, feeling at this moment the first great sorrow of his life, but also perceiving that he could not judge the exquisite creature who lay before him like a statue of the Magdalene carved by the most finished artist, because he could not help loving her in her sweet embarrassment more tenderly than ever. "Madeleine," he said softly, and his breath fanned her brow like a cooling breeze, "will you trust me? It will be easier for you." She clasped his hand in her slender, transparent fingers, raising her eyes beseechingly to his, with a look of the sweetest feminine weakness, like a young girl or an innocent child who is atoning for some trivial sin. "Let me keep my secret," she pleaded, with such touching embarrassment that it almost robbed the prince of his calmness. "Very well," he said, controlling himself with difficulty. "I will ask no farther questions and will not strive to penetrate your secret. But if you ever need a friend, and I fear that may happen, pray commit no farther imprudences, and remember that, in me, you possess one who adds to a warm heart a sufficiently cool head to be able to act for you as this difficult situation requires. Farewell, cher ami, secure a complete rest." Without waiting for an answer, like the experienced physician, who merely prescribes for his patients without conversing with them about the matter, he disappeared. The Countess was ashamed, fairly oppressed by the generosity of his character. Would it have been better had she told him the truth? Should she tell him that she was married? Married? Was she wedded? Could she be called a wife? She had played a farce with herself and Freya, a farce in which, from her standpoint, she could not believe herself. On their flight from Ammergau, they had hastened to Frankenberg, surprised the old pastor in his room, and with Josepha and a coachman who had grown grey in the service of the Wildenau family for witnesses, declared in the presence of the priest that they took each other for husband and wife. The old gentleman, in his surprise and perplexity, knew not what course to pursue. The Countess appealed to the right of the Tridentine Council, according to which she and Freya, after this declaration, were man and wife, even without a wedding ceremony or permission to marry in another diocese. Then the loyal pastor, who had grown grey in the service of the Frankenbergs as well as of his church, could do nothing except acknowledge the fact, declare the marriage valid, and given the marriage certificate. So at the breakfast table, over the priest's smoking coffee, the bond had been formed which the good pastor was afterwards to enter in the church register as a marriage. But even this outward proof of the marriage between the widowed Countess Wildenau and the Ammergau woodcarver Freya was removed, for the Countess had been right in distrusting her father and believing that his advice concerning the secret marriage was but a stratagem of war to deter her from taking any public step. On returning from the priest's, her carriage dashed by Prince von Frankenberg's. 10 minutes after the prince rushed like a tempest into the room of the peaceful old pastor, and succeeded in preventing the entry of the scandal, as he called it, in the church register. So the proofs of the fact were limited to the marriage certificate in the husband's hands and the 2 witnesses, Josepha and Martin, the coachman. A chain, it is true, which bound Madeleine von Wildenau, yet which was always in her power. What was this marriage? How would a man like the prince regard it? And would it not wear a totally different aspect in the eyes of the sceptic and experienced man of the world than in those of the simple-hearted peasant who believed that everything which glittered was gold? Was such a marriage, which permitted the exercise of none of the rights and duties which elevate it into a moral institution, better than an illegal relation? Aye, rather worse, for it perpetrated a robbery of God. It was an illegal relation which had stolen a sacred name. But what did this mean? Today, for the first time, she felt as if fate might give the matter the moral importance which she did not willingly accord it, as if the deity whose name she had abused might take her at her word and compel her to turn jest into earnest. Her better nature frankly confessed that this would be only moral justice. To this great truth she bowed her head as the full ears bend before the approaching hailstorm. In spite of the chill autumn evening, there was an incomprehensible sultriness in the air of the room. Something in the brief conversation with Herr Wildenau, and especially in the manner in which the prince, with his keen penetration, understood the episode, startled the Countess and aroused her fears. Why had Herr Wildenau gone to the little hunting box? How had he seen the child? Yet how could she herself have been so imprudent as to display the picture? And still, it was the infant Christ of Raphael. Could she not even have one of Raphael's heads in her drawing-room without danger that someone would discover a suspicious resemblance? She sprang from the cushions indignantly, drawing herself up to her full height. Who was she? What did she dread? Anything but cowardice, Madeleine, she cried out to herself. Woe betide you if your resolution fails, you are lost. If you do not look the brute gossip steadily in the eye, if so much as an eyelash quivers, it will rend you. Do not be cowardly, Madeleine, have no scruples. They will betray you, will make your glance timid, your bearing uncertain, send a flush to your brow at every chance word. But, she sank back among her cushions, but unfortunately this very day the misfortune has happened. All these people may go away and say that they saw the Countess Wildenau blush and grow confused. And why? Because a child was mentioned. She shuddered and cowered. A moan of pain escaped her lips. Yet you exist, my child. I cannot put you out of the world, and no mother ever had such a son. And I, instead of being permitted to be proud of you, must feel ashamed. O God, thou gavest me every blessing, the man I loved, a beautiful child, all earthly power and splendour, yet no contentment, no happiness. What do I lack? She sat a long time absorbed in gloomy thought. Then suddenly the cause became clear. She lacked the moral balance of service and counter-service. That was the reason all her happiness was but theft, and she was forced, like a thief, to enjoy it in fear and secrecy. Her maternal happiness was theft, for Josepha, the stranger, filled a mother's place to the boy, and when she herself pressed him to her heart, she was stealing a love she had not earned. Her conjugal happiness was a theft. For so long as she retained her fortune, she was not permitted to marry. That was the curse. Wherever she looked, wherever she saw herself, she was always the recipient, the petitioner. And what did she bestow in return? Where did she make any sacrifice? Nothing. And nowhere. Egotism was apparent in everything. To enjoy all, possess all, even what was forbidden and sacrifice nothing, must finally render her a thief, in her own eyes, in those of God, and who knows, perhaps also in those of men, should her secret ever be discovered. Woe betide you, unhappy woman! Have you not the strength to resign one for the other? Would you rather live in fear of the betrayer than voluntarily relinquish your stolen goods? Then do not think yourself noble or lofty. Do not deem yourself worthy of the grace for which you long. She hid her face in the cushions of the divan, fairly quivering under the burden of her self-accusation. "I beg your pardon, Your Highness. I only wanted to ask what evening toilette you desired." Madeleine von Wildenau started up. "If you would only cease this stealing about on tiptoe," she angrily exclaimed. "I beg pardon. I knocked twice and thought I did not hear your come in. Walk so that you can be heard. I don't like to have my servants glide about like spies, remember that. At Princess Hohenstein's we were all obliged to wear felt slippers. Her Highness could not endure any noise. Well, I have better nerves than Princess Hohenstein, and apparently a worse conscience," muttered the maid, who had not failed to notice her mistress' confusion. "May I ask once more about the evening toilette? Street costume. I shall not go to the theatre. I will drive out to the estates. Order Martin to have the carriage ready." The maid withdrew. The Countess felt as if she were in a fever. Must that inquisitive maid see her in such a condition? It seemed as though she was surrounded like a hunted animal, as though eyes were everywhere watching her. There was something in the woman's look which had irritated her. Oh God, had matters gone so far? Must she fear the glance of her own maid? Up and away to nature, and her child, to her poor neglected husband on the cliff. Her heart grew heavy at the thought that the time since she had last visited the deserted man could soon be counted by months. Her interest in the simple-hearted son of nature was beginning to wane, she could not deny it. Woe betide her if love should also grow cold. If that should happen, then... She realized it with horror. She would have no excuse for the whole sensuous, supersensuous episode which had periled both her honor and her existence. Chapter 19. A.T.T.E. Child's bedside. The stars were already twinkling above the grease. Here and there one looked as if impaled on a giant flagstaff as they sparkled just above the tops of the lofty firs or the sharp pinnacles of the crags. Countless shooting stars glided hither and thither like loving glances seeking one another. The night was breathing in long regular inhalations. Every 5 minutes her sleeping breath rustled the tree-tops. 4 horses drawing a small calash whose wheels were covered with rubber glided across the grease as noiselessly as a spectral equipage. The animals knew the way, and their fiery spirit urged them forward without the aid of shout or lash, though the mountain grew steeper and steeper till the black walls of the hunting seat at last became visible in the glimmering starlight. Josepha was standing at the window of the little sitting-room upstairs. "I think the Countess is coming." At a table, by the lamp, bending over a book, sat the steward. He evidently had not heard the words, for he did not look up from the volume, and it seemed as if the gloomy shadow above his eyes grew darker still. "Joseph, the Countess is coming!" cried Josepha in a louder tone. "You are deceiving yourself again, as usual," he replied in the wonderful voice which gave special importance to the simplest words, as when a large musical bell is rung for some trivial cause. "No, this time it really is she," Josepha insisted. "I don't believe it." Josepha shook her head. "You must receive her. She is not coming on my account, it is only to see the child." "Then I will go." "Oh, heaven, what a life!" sighed Joseph, going out upon the green moss-covered steps of the half-ruined stone stairs where the carriage had just stopped. "Is that you, Josepha?" asked the Countess in a disappointed tone. Where is Freya?" "He is within, Your Highness. He would not believe that Your Highness was really coming." The Countess understood the bitter meaning of the words. "I did not come to endure ill temper," she murmured. "Is the boy asleep?" "Yes, we have taken him into the sitting-room. He is coughing again and his head is burning, so I wanted to have him in a warmer room." "Isn't it warm here?" "Since the funnel fell out, we cannot heat these rooms. Freya tried to fit it in, but it smokes constantly. I wrote to Your Highness last month asking what should be done. Freya, too, reported a fortnight ago that the stove ought to be repaired, and the child moved to other apartments before the cold weather set in if Your Highness approved, but we have had no answer. Now the little boy is ill. It is beginning to be very cold." Madeleine von Wildenau bit her lips. Yes, it was true, the letters had been written, and in the whirl of society and visits she had forgotten them. Now the child was ill, through her fault. She entered the sitting-room. Freya stood waiting for her in a half-defiant, half-submissive attitude, half-master, half-servant. The bearing was unlovely, like everything that comes from a false position. It displeased the Countess and injured Freya, though she had herself placed him in this situation. It made him appear awkward and clownish. When, with careless hand, We have damaged a work of art and perceive that instead of improving we have marred it. We do not blame ourselves, but the botched object and the innocent object must suffer because we have spoiled our own pleasure in it. It is the same with the work of art of creation, a human being. There are some natures which can never leave things undisturbed, but seek to gain a creative share in everything by attempts at shaping. And when convinced that it would have been better had they left the work untouched, they see in the imperfect essay, not their own want of skill, but the inflexibility of the material, pronounce it not worth the labour bestowed, and cast it aside. The Countess had one of these natures, so unconsciously cruel in their artistic experiments, and her marred object was Freya. Therefore his bearing could not please her, and she allowed a glance of annoyance to rest upon him which did not escape his notice. Passing him, she went to their son's bed. There lay the infant Christ, a boy 6 or 7 years old with silken curls and massive brows, beneath whose shadow the closed eyes were concealed by dark lashed lids. A single ray from the hanging lamp fell upon the forehead of the little Raphael, and showed the soft brows knit as if with unconscious pain. The child was not happy, or not well, or both. He breathed heavily in his sleep, and there was a slight nervous twitching about the delicately moulded nostrils. "He has evidently lost flesh since I was last here," said the Countess anxiously. Freya remained silent. "What do you think?" asked the mother. "What can I think? You have not seen the boy for so long that you can judge whether he has altered far better than I." "Joseph!" The beautiful woman drew herself up, and a look of genuine sorrow rested upon the pale, irritated countenance of her husband. "Whenever I come, I find nothing save bitterness and cutting words, open and secret reproaches. This is too much. Not even today, when I find my child ill, do you spare the mother's anxious heart. This is more than I can endure. It is ignoble, unchivalrous." "Pardon me," replied her husband in a low tone. "I could not suppose that a mother who deserts her child for months could possibly possess so tender a nature that she would instantly grow anxious over a slight illness or a change in his appearance. I am a plain man and cannot understand such contradictions. Yes, from your standpoint you are right. In your eyes I must seem a monster of heartlessness. I almost do in my own. Yet, precisely because the reproach appears merited, it cuts me so deeply. That is why it would be generous and noble to spare me. Oh, Freya, what has become of the great divine love which once forgave my every fault? It is where you have banished it, buried in the depths of my heart, as I am buried among these lonely mountains, silent and forgotten." The Countess, shaking her head, gazed earnestly at him. "Joseph, you see that I am suffering. You must see that it would be a solace to rest in your love, and you are ungenerous enough to humble my bowed head still more. I have no wish to humble you. But we can be generous only to those who need it. I see in the haughty Countess Wildenau a person who can exercise generosity, but not require it. Because you do not look into the depths of my heart, tortured with agonies of unrest and self-accusation." As she spoke, tears sprang to her eyes, and she involuntarily thought of the faithful, shrewd friend at home, whose delicate power of perception had that very day spared her the utterance of a single word, and at one glance perceived all the helplessness of her situation. True, the latter was a man of the world whom the tinsel and glitter which surrounded her no longer had power to dazzle, and who was therefore aware how poor and wretched one can be in the midst of external magnificence. The former, a man of humble birth, with the childish idea of the value of material things current among the common people, could not imagine that a person might be surrounded by splendour and luxury, play a brilliant part in society, and yet be unhappy and need consideration. But, however she might apologize for him, the very excuses lowered him still more in her eyes. Each of these conflicts seemed to widen the gulf between them instead of bridging it. Such scenes, which always reminded her afresh of his lowly origin, did him more injury in her eyes than either of them suspected at the moment. They were not mere ebullitions of anger which yielded to equally sudden reactions. They were not phases of passion, but the result of cool deliberation from the standpoint of the educated woman, which ended in hopeless disappointment. The continual refrain, "You do not understand me," with which the Countess closed such discussions expressed the utter hopelessness of their mutual relations. "You wonder that I come so rarely," she said bitterly, "and yet it is you alone who are to blame. Nay, you have even kept me from the bedside of my child." "Indeed?" Freya with difficulty suppressed his rising wrath. This, too. Yes. How can you expect me to come gladly when I always encounter scenes like these? How often, when I could at last escape from the thousand demands of society and hurried hither with a soul thirsting for love, have you repulsed me with your perpetual reproaches which you make only because you have no idea of my relations and the claims of the fashionable world? So, at last, when I longed to come here to my husband and my child, dread of the unpleasant scenes which shadow your image held me back, and I preferred to conjure before me at home the Freya whom I once loved and always should love, if you did not yourself destroy the noble image. With that Freya I have sweet intercourse by my lonely fireside. With him I obtain comfort and peace, if I avoid this Freya with his petty sensitiveness, his constant readiness to take umbrage. A mournful smile illumined her face as she approached him. You see that when I think of the Freya of whom I have just spoken, the Freya of my imagination, my heart overflows and my eyes grow dim. Do you no longer know that Freya? Can you not tell me where I shall find him again if I seek him very, very earnestly? Freya opened his arms and pointed to his heart. Here, you can find him if you desire. Come, my beloved, loved beyond all things earthly, come to the heart which is only sick and sensitive from longing for you. In blissful forgetfulness she threw herself upon his breast, completely overwhelmed by another wave of the old illusion, losing herself entirely in his ardent embrace. "Oh, my dear wife," he murmured in her ear, "I know that I am irritable and unjust. But you do not suspect the torment to which you condemn me. Banished from your presence, far from my home, torn from my native soil, and not yet rooted in yours. What life is this? My untrained reason is not capable of creating a philosophy which could solve this mystery. Why must these things be? I am married, yet not married. I am your husband, yet you are not my wife. I have committed no crime, yet am a prisoner, am not a dishonored man, yet am a despised one who must conceal himself in order not to bring shame upon his wife. So the years passed and life flits by. You come often, but I might almost say only to make me taste once more the joys of the heaven from which I am banished. Ah, it is more cruel than all the tortures of Bel, for the condemned souls are not occasionally transferred to heaven, only to be again thrust forth and suffer a thousandfold. Even the avenging God is not so pitiless." The Countess, overwhelmed by this heavy charge, let her head sink upon her husband's breast. "See, my wife," he continued in a gentle, subdued tone, whose magic filled her heart with that mournful pleasure with which we listen to a beautiful dirge, even beside the corpse of the object of our dearest love. "In your circles people probably have sufficient self-control to suppress a great sorrow. I know that I only weary and annoy you by my constant complaints, and that you will at last prefer to avoid me entirely rather than expose yourself to them. I know this, yet I cannot do otherwise. I was not trained to dissimulation, self-control, as you call it. I cannot laugh when my heart is bleeding or utter sweet words when my soul is full of bitterness. I do not understand what compulsion could prevent you, a free, rich woman, from coming to the husband whom you love, and I cannot believe that you could not come if you longed to do so. That is why I so often doubt your love. What should you love in me? I warned you that I cannot always move about with the crown of thorns and sceptre of reeds as exe homo, and you now perceive that you were deceived in me, that I am only a poor ordinary man, your inferior in education and intellect. And so long as I am not a real exe homo, though that perhaps might happen, so long I am not what you need. And however poor and insignificant I may be, I am not without honour. And when I think that you only come occasionally, out of compassion, to bring the beggar the crumbs which your fine gentlemen have left me, then I will speak frankly. Then my pride rebels, and I would rather starve than accept alms. And therefore you thrust back the loving wife, when, with an overflowing heart, she stole away from the glittering circles of society to hasten to your side. Therefore you were cold and stern, disdaining what the others sought in vain. For, however distant you may be, there has not been an hour of my life which you might not have witnessed, however free and independent of you I may stand. There is not a fibre in my heart which does not cling to you. Ah, if you could only understand this deep, sacred tie which binds the freest spirit to the husband, the father of my child. If I had wings to soar over every land and sea, I should ever be drawn back to you, and would return as surely as the bird bound by the silken cord. No one can part me from you except you yourself. That you are not my equal in education, as you assert, does not sever us, but inferiority of character would do so, for nothing but greatness attracts me. To find you base would be the death knell of our love. Even the child would no longer be a bond between us, for to intellectual natures like mine, the ties of blood are mere animal instincts, unless pervaded and transfigured by a loftier idea. The greatest peril which threatens our love is that your narrow views prevent your attaining the standpoint from which a woman like myself must be judged. I have great faults which need great indulgence, and a superiority which is not alarmed by them. Unfortunately, my friend, you lack both. I have a great love for you, but you measure it by the contracted scales of your humdrum morality, and before this it vanishes, because its dimensions far transcend it. Where, my friend, is the grandeur, the freedom of the soul which I need? Alas, your words are but too true, said Freya, releasing her from his embrace. Every word is a death sentence. You ask a grandeur which I do not possess and shall never obtain. I grew up in commonplace ideas. I have never seen any other life than that in which the husband and wife belong together. The father and mother reared, tended, and watched their children together, and love in this close, tender companionship reached its highest goal. This idea of quiet domestic happiness embodied to me all the earthly bliss allotted by God to Christian husbands and wives. Of a love which is merely incidental, something in common with all the other interests of life, and which, when it comes in conflict with them, must move aside and wait till it is permitted to assert itself again. Of such a love I had no conception. At least, not in marriage. True, we know that in the dawn of love it is kept secret as something which must be hidden. But this is a state of restless torture, which we strive to end as soon as possible by a marriage. That such a condition of affairs would be possible in marriage would never have entered my mind, and say what you will, a marriage like ours is little better than an illegal relation. The Countess started. She had had the same thought that very day. And I, Freya inexorably continued, am little more than your lover. If you choose to be faithful to me, I shall be grateful, but do not ask the grandeur, as you call it, of my believing it. Whoever regards conjugal duty so lightly, whoever, like you, feels bound by no law which was only made for poor, ordinary people, will keep faith only, so long as it is agreeable to do so. The Countess, gazing into vacancy, vainly strove to find a reply. This seems very narrow, very ridiculous from your lofty standpoint. You see, I shall always be rustic. It is a misfortune for you that you came to me. Why did you not remain in your own aristocratic circle? Gentlemen of noble birth would have understood you far better than a poor, plain man like me. I tell myself so daily. It is the worm which gnaws at my life. Now you have the greatness you desire, the only greatness I can offer, that of the perception of our misery. Madeline nodded hopelessly. Yes, we are in an evil strait. I despair more and more of restoring peace between us, for it would be possible only in case I could succeed in making you comprehend the necessity of the present, certainly unnatural form of our marriage. Yet you cannot and will not see that a woman like me cannot live in poverty, that wealth, though it does not render me happy, is nevertheless indispensable, not on account of the money, but because with it honor, power, and distinction would be lost. You know that this would follow an acknowledgment of our marriage, and I would die rather than resign them. I was born to a station too lofty to be content in an humble sphere. Do you expect the eagle to descend to a linnet's nest and dwell there? It would die, for it can breathe only in the regions for which it was created. But the eagle should never have stooped to the linnet, said Freya gloomily. I believe that I should find in you a consort, aspiring enough to follow me to my heights, for the wings of your genius rustled with mighty strokes above me when you hung upon the cross. Oh, can one who, like you, has reached the height of the cross, sink to the Philistine narrowness of the ideas of the lower classes, and thrust aside the foaming elixir of love, because it is not proffered in the usual wooden bowl of the daily performance of commonplace duties? It is incredible, but true. And lastly, you threaten that I shall make you an exe homo. If you were, it would be no fault of mine, but because, even in daily life, you could not cease to play the Christ. The Countess had spoken with cutting sharpness and bitterness. It seemed as if the knife she turned against the man she loved must be piercing her own heart. Freya's breath came heavily, but no sound betrayed the anguish of the wound he had received. But the child, as if feeling, even in its sleep, that its mother was about to sunder, with a fatal blow, the cord of life uniting her to the father and itself, quivered in pain and flung its little hands into the air, as though to protect the mysterious bond whose filaments ran through its heart also. "See, the child feels our strife and suffers from it," said Freya, and the unutterable pain in the words swept away all hardness, all defiance. The mother, with tearful eyes, sank down beside the bed of the suffering child, languishing under the discord between her and its father, like a tender blossom beneath the warfare of the elements. "My child," she said in a choking voice, "how thin your little hands have grown. What does this mean?" She pressed the boy's transparent little hands to her lips, and when she looked up again, 2 wonderful dark eyes were gazing at her from the child's pale face. Yes, those were the eyes of the infant Redeemer of the world in the picture of the Sistine Madonna, the eyes which mirror the foreboding of the misery of a world. It was the expression of Freya's, but spiritualized, and as single sunbeams dance upon a dark flood, it seemed as if golden rays from his mother's sparkling orbs had leaped into his. What a marvellous child! The mother's delicate beauty, blended with the deep earnestness of the father, steeped in the loveliness and transfiguration of Raphael, and she could wound the father of this boy with cruel words. She could scorn the wonderful soul of Freya, which gazed at her in mute reproach from the eyes of the child, because the woe of the Redeemer had impressed upon it indelible traces, disdain it beside the bed of this boy. This pledge of a love whose supernatural power transformed the man into a god, to rest for a moment in a divine embrace. "Mother," murmured the boy softly, as if in a waking dream. But Madeline von Wildenau felt with rapture that he meant her, not Josepha. Then he closed his eyes again and slept on. Kneeling at the son's bedside, she held out her hand to the father. It seemed as if a trembling ray of light entered her soul, reflected from the moment when he had formerly approached her in all the radiance of his power and beauty. "And we should not love each other?" she said, while binning tears flowed down her cheeks. Freya drew her from the child's couch, clasping her in a close embrace. "My dove!" He could say no more. Grief and love stifled his voice. She threw her arms around his neck, as she had done when she made her penitent confession with such irresistible grace that he would have pardoned every mortal sin. "Forgive me, Joseph," she said softly, in order not to wake the boy who, even in sleep, turned his little head toward his parents as a flower sways toward the sun. "I am a poor, weak woman. I myself suffer unutterably under the separation from you and the child. If you knew how I often feel, a rock would pity me. It is a miserable condition. Nothing is mine, neither you, my son, nor my wealth, unless I sacrifice one for the other, and that I cannot resolve to do. Ah, have compassion on my weakness. It is woman's way to bear the most unendurable condition, rather than form an energetic resolve which might change it. I know that the right course would be for me to find courage to renounce the world and say, I am married, I will resign, as my husband's will requires, the Wildenau fortune, I will retire from the stage as a beggar, I will starve and work for my daily bread. I often think how beautiful and noble this would be, and that perhaps we might be happy, so happier than we are now, if it were only done. But when I seriously face the thought, I feel that I cannot do it. Yet you told me in Ammergau, cried Freya, that it was only on your father's account that you could not acknowledge the marriage. Your father is now a paralytic, half-foolish old man, who cannot live long, then this reason will be removed. Yes, when we married it was he who prevented me from announcing it. I wished to do so, and it would have been easy. But if I state the fact now, after having been secretly married 8 years, during which I have illegally retained the property, I shall stamp myself a cheat. Take me to the summit of the Kofel and bid me leap down its 1,000 feet of cliff. I cannot, were it to purchase my eternal salvation. Hurl me down, I care not, but do not expect me voluntarily to take the plunge. It is impossible. Unless God sends an angel to bear me over the chasm on its wings, all pleading will be futile. She pressed her cheek, burning with the fever of fear, tenderly against his. Have pity on my weakness, forgive me. Ah, I know I am always talking about greatness, yet with me it exists only in the imagination. I am too base to be capable of what is really noble. You see me now, as God himself beholds me. He will judge me, but it is the privilege of marital love to forgive. Will you not use this sweet right? Perhaps God will show me some expedient. Perhaps I shall succeed in making an agreement with the relatives or gaining the aid of the king. But for all this I must live in the world. in order to secure influence and scope for my plans. Will you have patience and forbearance with me till there is a change? That will never be, any more than during the past 8 years. But I will bear with you, poor wife, in spite of everything. I will trust your love. I will try to repress my discontent when you come and gratefully accept what you bestow, without remonstrance or fault-finding. I will bear it as long as I can. Perhaps it will wear me out, then we shall both be released. I would have removed myself from the world long ago, but that would be a sin and would not have benefited you. Your heart is too kind not to be wounded, and the suicide's bloody shade would not have permitted you to enjoy your liberty. "Oh, heaven, what are you saying, my poor husband? Is that your condition?" cried the Countess, deeply stirred by the tragedy of these calmly uttered words. She shuddered at this glimpse of the dark depths of his fathomless soul, and what, in her opinion, he might lack in broadness of view was now supplied by the extent of his suffering. At this moment he again interested her. Throwing herself on his breast, she overwhelmed him with caresses. She sought to console him, make him forget the bitterness of his grief by the magic potion of her love. She herself did not know that even now, carried away by a genuine emotion of compassion, she was yielding to the demoniac charm of trying upon his pain the power of her coquetry, which she had long since tested sufficiently upon human beings. But where she would undoubtedly have succeeded with men of cultivation, she failed with this child of nature, who instinctively felt that this sweet display of tenderness was not meant for him, but was called forth by the struggle against a hostile element which she desired to bribe or conquer. His grief remained unchanged. It was too deeply rooted to be dispelled by the love raptures of a moment. Yet the poor husband, languishing for the wife so ardently beloved, took the poisoned draught she offered, as the thirsting traveller in the desert puts his burning lips to the tainted pool whence he knows he is drinking death. Chapter 20. Conflicts. It was morning. The lamp had almost burned out. Josepha and the Countess were busied with the boy, whose sleep was disturbed by a short, dry cough. The mother had remained at the little castle all night and rested only a few hours. When with the little one, there were times when her maternal affection was roused. Then she was seized with dread, lest God should recall a precious gift, because she had not known its value. It would be only just, she was aware of that. And because of its justice, it seemed probable, and her heart strove to make amends in a few hours for the neglect of years. Perhaps thereby she might escape the punishment. But when she had gone, the little pale star in her horizon receded into the background before the motley phenomena of the world in which she lived, and only in isolated moments did she realize, by a dull pain, that feelings were slumbering within her soul which could not be developed, like a treasure which lies concealed in a spot whence it cannot be raised. It was akin to the parable of the servant who did not put out his talent at interest. This talent which God entrusted to men is love. A lofty, noble sentiment which we suppress is the buried treasure which God will require of us when the period for which he loaned it has expired. There were hours when the unhappy woman realized this. Then she accused everything, the world and herself, and the poor little child felt in his precocious soul the grief of the beautiful lady, in whom he presciently loved his mother without knowing that it was she. Ordinary children, like animals, love best those who provide for their physical wants and therefore frequently cling more fondly to the nurse than to the mother. Not so this boy. He was almost ungrateful to Josepha, who nursed him the more faithfully, the more he was neglected by the Countess. Josepha was passionately attached to the boy. All the sorrowful love which she had kept in her desolate heart for her own dead son was transferred from the first hour to this delicate, motherless creature. It reminded her so much of her own poor child, the marked family likeness between him and Freya, the mystery with which he must be surrounded, a mother who was ashamed of him, like Josepha at the time. It seemed as though her own dead child had returned to life, and besides, she passed for his mother. And the boy was born while the Countess was travelling in the East, and it was an easy matter to arrange with the authorities. The Countess, while in Jerusalem, took the name of Josepha Freya, Josepha that of Countess Wildenau, and the child was baptized under the name of Freya. It was entered in the register as an illegitimate child, and Josepha bore the disgrace and returned to Germany as the boy's mother. What was lacking to complete Josepha's illusion that the child was hers, and that she might love it as a mother? Nothing, save the return of her affection. And this was a source of bitter pain. She might give and do what she would, devote her days and nights to him, sacrifice her already failing health, nothing availed. When after weeks and months of absence the beautiful lady, as he called her, came, his melancholy eyes brightened, and he seemed to glow with new life as he stretched out his little arms to her with a look that appeared to say, "Had you not come soon, I should have died." Josepha no longer existed for him, and even his father, whom he usually loved tenderly as his godfather, Goth, as the people in that locality call it, was forgotten. This vexed Josepha beyond endurance. She performed a mother's duties in all their weariness. Her heart cherished a mother's love with all its griefs and cares, and, when that other woman came, who deserved nothing, did nothing, had neither a mother's heart nor a mother's rights, she took the child away, and Josepha had naught save the trouble and the shame. The former enjoyed hurriedly, lightly, carelessly, the joys which alone could have repaid Josepha's sacrifices, the child's sweet smiles, tender caresses, and coaxing ways, for which she would have given her life. She ground her sharp white teeth, and a secret jealousy, bordering on hatred, took root in her embittered mind. What could she esteem in this woman? For what should she be grateful to her? She was kind to her, because she needed her services. But what did she care for Josepha herself? She might give me less, but do her duty to her husband and child. That would suit me better, she secretly murmured. To have such a child, and not be a mother to him, not give him the sunshine, the warmth of maternal love which he needs, and then come and take away from another what she would not earn for herself. To have such a husband, the highest blessing Josepha knew on earth, a man to whom the whole world paid homage as if to God, a man so devout, so good, so modest, so faithful, and desert him, conceal him in a ruinous old castle, that no one might note the disgrace of the noble lady who had married a poor woodcarver. And then to come and snatch the kisses from his lips as birds steal berries when no one was looking, he was good enough for that, and he permitted it. The proud, stern man whom the whole community feared and honoured. It was enough to drive one mad, and she, Josepha, must swallow her wrath year after year, and dared not say anything, for woe betide her if she complained of the Countess. He would allow no attack upon her, though this state of affairs was killing him. She was forced to witness how he grieved for this woman, see him gradually lose flesh and strength, for the wicked creature bewitched everyone, and charmed her husband and child till they were fairly dying of love for her, while she was carrying on her shameless flirtations with others. Such were the terrible accusations raging in Josepha's passionate soul against the Countess, charges which effaced the memory of all she owed her former benefactress. "I should like to know what she would do without me," was the constant argument of her ungrateful hatred. "She may well be kind to me. If I chose, her wicked pranks would soon be over. She would deserve it. And what do I care for the pay? I can look after myself. I don't need the ill-gotten gains. But then I should be obliged to leave the boy. He would have no one. No, no, Josepha, hold out as long as possible, and be silent for the child's sake." Such were the conflicts seething in the breast of the silent dweller in the hunting castle, such the gulfs yawning at the unsuspicious woman's feet. It was the vengeance of insulted popular morality to which she imagined herself so far superior. This insignificant impulse in the progress of the development of mankind, insignificant because it was the special attribute of the humble plain people, will always conquer in the strife against the emancipation of so-called more highly organized natures, for it is the destiny of individual giants always to succumb in the war against ordinary mortals. Here there is a great, eternal law of the universe, which from the beginning gathered its contingent from the humble, insignificant elements, and in so-called plebeian morality is rooted, Christianity. Therefore the former will conquer and always assert its right, even where the little Philistine army which gathers around its standard defeats a far nobler foe than itself, a foe for whom the gods themselves would mourn. Woe betide the highly gifted individuality which unites with Philistine elements, gives them rights over it, and believes it can still pursue its own way. In any given case it will find pity before God sooner than before the judgment seat of this literal service and the spears and shafts of its yeomanry. Something like one of these lance thrusts pierced the Countess from Josepha's eyes as she bent over the waking child. Josepha tried to take the boy, but he struggled violently and would not go to her. With sparkling, longing eyes he nestled in the arms of the beautiful lady. The Countess drew the frail little figure close to her heart. As she did so, she noticed the stern, resentful expression of Josepha's dry, cracked lips and the hectic flush on the somewhat prominent cheekbones. There was something in the girl's manner which displeased her mistress. Had it been in her power, she would have dismissed this person, who was constantly altering for the worse. But she was bound to her by indissoluble fetters, nay, was dependent upon her, and must fear her. She felt this whenever she came. Under such impressions, every visit to the castle had gradually become a penance instead of a pleasure. Her husband, out of humour and full of reproaches, the child ill, the nurse sullen and gloomy. A spoiled child of the world, who had always had everything disagreeable removed from her path, could not fail at last to avoid a place where she could not breathe freely a single hour. "Will you not get the child's breakfast, Josepha?" she said wearily, the dark circles around her eyes bearing traces of her night vigil. "He must be bathed first," said Josepha, in the tone which often wounded the Countess, the tone by which nurses to whose charge children are left too much instruct young mothers that, if they take no care of their little ones elsewhere, they have nothing to say in the nursery. The Countess, with aristocratic self-control, struggled to maintain her composure. Then she said quietly, though her voice sounded faint and hoarse, "The child seems weak. I think it will be better to give him something to eat before washing him." "Yes," pleaded the little fellow, "I am thirsty." The words reminded the Countess of his father as he said on the cross, "I thirst." When these memories came, all the anguish of her once beautiful love, now perishing so miserably, overwhelmed her. She lifted the boy. He was light as a vapour, a vision of mist, from the bed into her lap, and wrapped his little bare feet in the folds of her morning dress. He pressed his little head, crowned with dark, curling locks, against her cheek. Such moments were sweet, but outweighed by too much bitterness. "Bring him some milk, fresh milk," Madeleine von Waldnau repeated in the slightly imperious tone which seems to consider opposition impossible. "That will be entirely different from his usual custom," remarked Josepha, as if the Countess's order had seriously interfered with the regular mode of life necessary to the child. The mother perceived this, and a faint flush of shame and indignation suffused her face, but instantly vanished, as if grief had consumed the wave of blood which wrath had stirred. "Is your mother, Josepha, kind to you?" she asked, when Josepha had left the room. The boy nodded carelessly. "She does not strike you, she is gentle." "No, she doesn't strike me," the little fellow answered. "She loves me." "Do you love her too?" the Countess went on. Why? "Yes," said the child, shrugging his shoulders. Then he looked tenderly into her face. "I love you better. That is not right. Josepha is your mother. You must love her best." The boy shook his head thoughtfully. "But I would rather have you for my mamma." "That cannot be, unfortunately. I must not." The child gazed at her with an expression of sorrowful disappointment. "But in heaven, when I go to heaven, you will be my mother there, won't you?" The Countess shuddered. An indescribable pain pierced her heart, yet she was happy, a blissful anguish. Tears streamed from her eyes, and clasping the child tenderly, she gently kissed him. "Yes, my child, in heaven. Perhaps I may be your mother." And Josepha now brought in the milk and wanted to give it to him, but the boy would not take it from her. He insisted that the Countess must hold the bowl. She did so, but her hand trembled, and Josepha was obliged to help her, or the whole contents would have been spilled. She averted her face. "She cannot even give her child anything to drink," thought Josepha, as she moved about the room, putting it in order. "Josepha, please leave me alone a little while," said the Countess, almost beseechingly. "Indeed?" Josepha's cheeks flushed scarlet. It seemed as if the bones grew still more prominent. "If I am in your Highness' way, I can go at once." "Josepha," said the Countess, now suddenly turning toward her a face wet with tears, "surely I might be allowed to spend 15 minutes alone with my child without offending anyone. I will forgive your words, on account of your natural jealousy, and I think you already regret them, do you not?" "Yes," replied Josepha, somewhat reluctantly, but so conquered by the unhappy mother's words that she pressed a hard, half-reluctant kiss upon the Countess' hand with her rough, parched lips. Then, with a passionate glance at the child, she gave place to the mother whose claim she would fain have disputed before God himself if she could. But when the door had closed behind her, The Countess could bear no more. Placing the child in his little bed, she flung herself sobbing beside it. "My child! My child! Forgive me," she cried, forgetting all prudence. "Pray for me to God." Just at that moment the door opened and Freya entered. All that was stirring the mother's heart instantly became clear to him, as he saw her thus broken down beside the boy's bed. "Calm yourself. What will the child think?" he said, bending down and raising her. "Don't cry, Mamma," said the boy, stroking the soft hair on the grief-bowed head. He did not know why he now suddenly called her Mamma. Perhaps it was a prospect of the heaven where she would be his mother, and he said it in advance. "Oh, Freya, kill me. I am worthy of nothing better. Cut short the battle of a wasted life. An animal which cannot recover is killed out of pity. Why not a human being who feels suffering doubly? Magdalena, Countess, I do not know you in this mood. Nor do I know myself. What am I? What is a mother who is no mother? A wife who cannot declare herself a wife? A fish that cannot swim? A bird that cannot fly? We kill such poor crippled creatures out of sheer compassion. What kind of existence is mine? An egotist who, nevertheless, feels the pain of those whom she renders unhappy. An aristocrat who cannot exist outside of her own sphere, and yet pines for the eternal verity of human nature. A coquette who trifles with hearts and yet would die for a genuine feeling. These are my traits of character. Can there be anything more contradictory, more full of wretchedness? Let us go out of doors, Countess. Such conversation is not fit for the child to hear." "Oh, he does not understand it." "He understands more than you believe. You do not know what questions he often asks. Ah, you deprive yourself of the noblest joys by being unable to watch the remarkable development of this child." She nodded silently, absorbed in gazing at the boy. "Come, Countess, the sun has risen. The cool morning air will do you good. I will ring for Josepha to take the boy," he said quietly, touching the bell. The little fellow sat up in bed. His breathing was hurried and anxious. His large eyes were fixed imploringly on the Countess. "Oh, Mamma, dear Mamma in heaven, stay, don't go away. Ah, if only I could, my child. How gladly I would stay here always. But I will come back again presently. I will only walk in the sunshine for half an hour. Oh, I would like to go in the sunshine too. Can't I go with you and run about a little while?" "Not today, not until your cough is cured, my poor little boy, but I'll promise to talk and think of nothing but you until I return. Meanwhile, Josepha shall wash and dress you. I don't understand that. Josepha can do it better." "Oh, yes, I'm good enough for that," thought the girl, who heard the last words just as she entered. "My beautiful mamma has been crying because she is a bird and can't fly," said the child to Josepha with sorrowful sympathy. "But you can't fly either, nor I till we are angels, then we can." He spread out his little arms like wings, as if he longed to soar upward and away, but an attack of coughing made him sink back upon his pillows. The husband and wife looked at each other with the same sorrowful anxiety. The Countess bent over the little bed, as if she would fain stifle with kisses the cough that racked the little chest. "Mamma, it doesn't hurt. You must not cry," said the boy consolingly. "There is a spider inside of my breast which tickles me, so I have to cough. But it will spin a big net of silver threads like those on the Christmas tree which will reach to heaven, then I'll climb up on it." The Countess could scarcely control her emotion. Freya drew her hand through his arm and led her out into the dewy morning. "You are so anxious about our secret, and yet, if I were not conscientious enough to help you guard it, you would betray yourself every moment. You are imprudent with the child. It is not for my own interest, but yours that I warn you. Do not allow your newly awakened maternal love to destroy your self-control in the boy's presence. Do not let him call you Mamma, poor mother. Indeed, I understand how this wounds you. But it must be one thing or the other. If you cannot or will not be a mother to the child, you must renounce this name." She bowed her head. "You are as cruel as ever, though you are right. How can I maintain my self-control when I hear such words from the child? What a child he is! Whenever I come, I marvel at his intellectual progress. If only it is natural, if only it is not the omen of an early death." Freya pitied her anxiety. It is merely because the child is reared in solitude, associating solely with two sorrowing people, Josepha and myself. It is natural that his young soul should develop into a graver and more thoughtful character than other children, he said consolingly. They had gone out upon a dilapidated balcony, overgrown with vines and bushes. It was a beautiful morning, but the surrounding woods and the mouldering autumn leaves were white with hoarfrost. Friar wrapped the shivering woman in a cloak which he had taken with him. Under the cold breath of the bright fall morning and her husband's cheering words, she gradually grew calm and regained her composure. "But something must be done with the child," she said earnestly. "Matters cannot go on so. He looks too ethereal. I will send him to Italy with Josepha." "Good heavens, then I shall be entirely alone," said Freya, with difficulty suppressing his dismay. "Yet it must be," replied the Countess firmly. "How shall I endure it? The child was my all, my good angel, my light in darkness. Often his little hands have cooled my brow when the flames of madness were circling around it. Often his eyes, his features have again revealed your image clearly when, during a long separation, it had become blurred and distorted. While gazing at the child, the dear, beautiful child, I felt that nothing could sever this sacred bond. The mother of this boy could not desert her husband. For the sake of this child she must love me, I said to myself, and learn to trust, to hope once more. And now I am to part from him. O God, thy judgment is severe. Thou didst send an angel to comfort thy divine Son on the Mount of Olives. Thou dost take him from me, yet not my will but thine be done." He bent his head sadly. "If it must be, take him. The child is ill. I have kept him shut up in these damp rooms too long. He needs sunshine and milder air. If he were obliged to spend another winter in this cold climate, it would be his death. But if it is so hard for you to be separated from the boy, go with him. I will hire a villa for you and Josepha somewhere on the Riviera. It will do you good, too, to leave this nook hidden among the woods. And I cannot shelter you here in Bavaria where everyone knows you, without betraying our relation." Freya gazed at her with a mournful smile. "And you think that I would go?" He shook his head. "No, I cannot make it so easy for you. We are still husband and wife. I am still yours, as you are mine. And though you so rarely come to me, if during the whole winter there was but a single hour when you needed a heart, you must find your husband's. I must be here." He drew her gently to his breast. "No, my wife, it would have been a comfort if I could have kept the child. But if you must take him from me, I will bear this too, like everything which comes from your hand, be it life or death. Nothing shall part me from you, not even love for my boy." There was something indescribable in the expression with which he gazed at her as he uttered the simple words, and she clung to him, overwhelmed by such unexampled fidelity, which thus sacrificed the last blessing he possessed for a single hour with her. "My husband, my kind, noble husband, the most generous heart in all the world," she cried, caressing him again and again as she gazed rapturously at the beautiful face, so full of dignity. "You shall not make the sacrifice for a single hour. Your wife will come and reward your loyalty with 1,000-fold greater love. Often, often, perhaps oftener than ever. For I feel that the present condition of affairs cannot last. I must be permitted to be wife and mother. I realized today, at the bedside of my child, that my guilt too was growing year by year. It is time for me to atone. When I return home, I will seriously consider what can be done to make an arrangement with my relatives. I need not confess that I am already married. I could say that I might marry if they would pay me a sufficient sum, but I would not do so if they refused me the means to live in a style which befitted my rank. And they will probably prefer to make a sacrifice which would enable me to marry, thereby giving them the whole property, rather than to compel me, by their avarice, to remain a widow and keep the entire fortune. That would be a capital idea. Do you see how inventive love is?" she said with charming coquetry, expecting his joyful assent. But he turned away with clouded brow. It seemed as though an icy wind had suddenly swept over the whole sunny landscape, transforming everything into a wintry aspect. Falsehood and deception everywhere, even in the most sacred things. When I hear you speak so, my heart shrinks. So noble a woman as you, to stoop to falsehood and deceit, like one of the basest." The Countess stood motionless, with downcast lids. Shame and pride were both visible on her brow. Her heart, too, shrank, and an icy chill encompassed it. "And what better proposal would you make?" "None," said Freya in a low tone. "For the only one I could suggest you would not accept. It would be to atone for the wrong you have committed, frankly confess how everything happened, and then retire with your husband and child into solitude, and live plainly, but honestly. The world would laugh at you, it is true, but the noble-hearted would honor you. I cannot imagine that any moral happiness is to be purchased by falsehood and deceit. There is but one way which leads to God, the way of truth, Every other is delusive. The beautiful woman gazed at him in involuntary admiration. This was the inward majesty by which the lowly man had formerly so awed her, and deeply as he shamed and wounded her, she bowed to this grandeur. Yet she could no longer bear his gaze. She felt humbled before him. Her pleasure in his companionship was destroyed. She stood before the man whom she believed so far beneath her, like a common criminal, convicted of the most petty falsehood, the basest treachery. She fairly loathed herself. Where was there anything to efface this brand? Where was the pride which could raise her above this disgrace? In her consciousness of rank? Woe betide her. What would her peers say if they knew her position? Would she not be cast out from every circle? What was there which would again restore her honour? She knew no dignity, no honour save those which the world bestows, and to save them at any cost and by any means. She sank still lower in her own eyes and those of the poor but honourable man who had more cause to be ashamed of her than she of him. She must return home. She must again see her palace, her servants, her world, in order to believe that she was still herself, that the ground was still firm under her feet, for everything in and around her was wavering. "Please order the horses to be harnessed," she said, turning toward the half-ruined door through which they had come out of the house. It had indeed grown dull and cold. A pallid autumnal fog was shrouding the forest. It looked doubtful whether it was going to rain or snow. "I have the open carriage. I should like to get home before it rains," she said, apologetically, without looking at him. Freya courteously opened the heavy ancient iron door. They walked silently along a dark, cold, narrow passage to the door of the boy's room. "I will go and have the horses harnessed," said Freya, and the Countess entered the chamber. She took an absent leave of the child. She did not notice how he trembled at the news that she was going home. She did not hear him plead, "Take me with you." She comforted him as usual with the promise that she would soon come again, and beckoned Josepha out of the room. The boy gazed after her with the expression of a dying roe, and a few large tears rolled down his pale cheeks. The mother saw it, but she could not remain. Her stay here was over for that day. Outside, she informed Josepha of the plan of sending her and the child to Italy, but the latter shook her head. "The child needs nothing but its mother," she said pitilessly. "It longs only for you, and if you send it still farther away, it will die." The Countess stood as if sentenced. When you are with him, he revives, and when you have gone, he droops like a flower without the sun. "Oh, heaven," moaned the Countess, pressing her clasped hands to her brow, "what is to be done?" "If you could take the boy, it would be the best cure. The child needs a mother's love. That would be more beneficial to him than all the travelling in the world. You have no idea how he clings to his mother. It really seems as if you had bewitched him. All day long he wears himself out listening and watching for the roll of the carriage, and when evening comes and the hour that you usually drive up arrives, his little hands are burning with fever from expectation. And then he sees how his father longs for you. A child like him notices everything, and when his father is sad, he is sorrowful too. "She is not coming today," he said a short time ago, stroking his father's cheek. He knew perfectly well what troubled him. A delicate little body like his is soon worn out by constant yearning. Every kid, every fawn, cries for its mother. Here in the woods, I often hear the young deer, whose mother has been shot, wail and cry all night long, and must not a child who has sense and affection long for its mother? You sit in your beautiful rooms at home and don't hear how up here in this dreary house with us two melancholy people, the poor child asks for the mother who is his all. "Josepha, you will kill me." The Countess clung to the door, post for support, her brain fairly whirled. "No, I shall not kill you, Countess. I only want to prevent your killing the child," said Josepha with flaming eyes. "Do you suppose that, if I could supply a mother's place to the boy, I would beg you for what is every child's right, and which every mother who has a mother's heart in her breast would give of her own accord? Certainly not. I would steal the child's heart, which you are starving. Ere I would give you one kind word, and you might beg in vain for your son's love, as I now beseech his mother's for him. But the poor little fellow knows very well who his mother is, and no matter what I do, he will not accept me. That is why I tell you just how matters are. Do what you choose with me. I no longer fear anything. If the child cannot be saved, I am done with the world. You know me, and know that I set no value on life. You have made it no dearer to me than it was when we first met." Just at that moment the door opened, and a small white figure appeared. The boy had heard Josepha's passionate tone, and came to his mother's assistance. "Mama, my dear Mama in heaven, what is she doing to you? She shan't hurt you." "Wicked Mama Josepha, that's why I don't like you. You are always scolding the beautiful, kind lady." He threw his little arm around his mother's neck as if to protect her. "Oh, you angel," cried the Countess, lifting him in her arms to press him to her heart. The rattle of wheels was heard outside. The Countess's 4 horses were coming. To keep the fiery animals waiting was impossible. Freya hastily announced the carriage. The horses were very unruly that day. The Countess gave the boy to Josepha's care. Freya silently helped her into the equipage. Everything passed like a flash of lightning, for the horses were already starting. One gloomy glace was exchanged between the husband and wife, the farewell of strangers, and away dashed the light vehicle through the autumn mists. The mother fancied she heard her boy weeping as she drove off, and felt as if Josepha had convicted her of the murder of the child. But she would atone for it, some day, soon. It seemed as if a voice within was crying aloud, "My child, my child." An icy moisture stood in drops upon her brow. Was it the sweat of anxiety or dew? She did not know. She could no longer think. She was sinking under all the anxieties which had pressed upon her that day. She closed her eyes and leaned back in the carriage as if fainting, while the horses rushed swiftly on with their light burden toward their goal. The hours flew past. The equipage drove up to the Wilhelmine palace, but she was scarcely conscious of it. All sorts of plans and resolutions were whirling through her brain. She was assisted from the carriage and ascended the carpeted marble stairs. 2 letters were lying on the table in her boudoir. The prince had been there and left one, a note, which contained only the words, "You will perceive that at the present time you dare not refuse this position. The friend who means most kindly." The other letter, in a large envelope, was an official document. Countess Wildnow had been appointed Mistress of Ceremonies. Chapter 21. Unaccountable. A moment and a turning point in a life. The Countess was herself again, as she called it. Thank God. The Amergau episode, with all its tragic consequences, belonged to the past. Today, under the emotional impressions and external circumstances at that luckless castle where everything conspired against her, she had thought seriously of breaking with her traditions and the necessities of life, faced the thought of poverty and shame so boldly that this appointment to the highest position at court saved her from the gulf of ruin. Stopped at the last moment, tottering, giddy, the startled woman sought to find a firm footing once more. She felt like a suicide who is not really in earnest and rejoices when someone prevents his design. She stood holding the document in her hand. This was truth, reality. The necessity for self-destruction was imagination. The disgrace whose brand she already felt upon her brow could no longer approach her. She set her foot upon the shaggy skin of a lion. The earth did not yet reel beneath her. She pressed her burning brow against a slender marble column. This too was still firm. She passed her slender fingers over the silk plush of the divan on which she reclined and rejoiced that it was still hers. Her eye, intoxicated with beauty, wandered over the hundreds of art treasures, pictures and statues from every land with which she had adorned her rooms. Nothing was lacking. Upon a pedestal stood the Apollo Belvedere, whose pure marble glowed warmly in a sunbeam shining through red curtains, as if real blood were circulating in the stone. The wondrous face smiled in divine repose upon the motley array which the art and industry of centuries had garnered here. The past and the present here closed their bewitching chain. Yonder stood a Venus de Milo, revealing to the charming owner the majesty of her own beauty. In a corner filled with flowers, a bathing nymph, by a modern master, timidly concealed herself. In a Gothic niche, a dying Christ closed his eyes to the splendour of the world and the senses. It was a Christ after the manner of Gabriel Max, which opened and shut its eyes. Not far away the portrait of the Countess, painted with the genius of Lenbach, stood forth from the dark frame, the type of a drawing-room blossom. Clad in a soft white robe of oriental stuff embroidered with gold, heavy enough to cling closely to the figure, flight enough to float away so far as to reveal all that fashion and propriety permitted to be seen of the beauty of a wonderful neck and arm. And, as Lenbach paints not only the outward form but the inward nature, a tinge of melancholy, of yearning and thoughtfulness rested upon the fair face, which made the beholder almost forget the beauty of the form in that of the soul, while gazing into the spiritual eyes which seemed to seek some other home than this prosaic earth. Just in the direction of her glance, Hermes, the messenger of death, bent his divine face from a group of palms and dried grasses. It seemed as if she beheld all these things for the first time, as if they had been newly given back to her that day after she had believed them lost. Her breath almost failed at the thought that she had been on the point of resigning it all. And for what? All these treasures of immortal beauty and art, for a weeping child and a surly man who loved in her only the housewife, which any maidservant can be, but understood what she really was, what really constituted her dignity and charm no more than he would comprehend Lenbuck's picture, which reflected to her her own person transfigured and ennobled. She gazed at herself with proud satisfaction. Should such a woman sacrifice herself to a man who scarcely knew the meaning of beauty? Destroy herself for an illusion of the imagination? She rang the bell. She felt the necessity of ordering something, to be sure that she was still mistress of the house. The lackey entered. "Your Highness? Thank heaven!" Her servant still obeyed her. "Send over to the Barnheim Palace and invite the prince to dine with me at 6, then serve lunch." "Very well. Has your Highness any other orders?" The maid. "Yes, your Highness." The man left the room with the noiseless, solemn step of a well-trained lackey. How can anyone live without servants? The Countess asked herself, looking after him. What should I have done if I had dismissed mine? She shuddered. Now that regal luxury again surrounded her, she was a different person from this morning. No doubt she still felt what she had suffered that day, but only as we dimly, after waking from a fevered dream, realize the tortures we have endured. Someone knocked, and the maid entered. "I will take a bath before lunch. I feel very ill. Pour a bottle of vinegar de bouilli into the water. I will come directly." The maid disappeared. Everything still went on like clockwork. Nothing had changed. No one noticed what she had almost done that day. The struggle was over. The royal order, which it would have been madness to oppose, had determined her course. But her nerves were still quivering from the experiences of the day. The child, if only she were not hampered by the child. That was the only thing which would not allow her to breathe freely. It was her own flesh and blood. That was the wound in her heart which could never be healed. She would always long for the boy, as he would for her. Yet, what did this avail? Nothing could be changed. She must do what reason and necessity required. At least for the present, nay. There was even something beautiful in a sorrow borne with aristocratic dignity. By the depth of the wound we proudly measure the depth of our own hearts. She pleased herself with the idea of doing the honours as mistress of ceremonies to kings and emperors, while yearning in the depths of her soul for a poor orphan child, the son of the proud Countess Wildenau, whose husband was a peasant. Only a nature of the elasticity of Madeleine von Wildenau's could sink so low and yet soar so high without losing its equilibrium. These were the oscillations which Ludwig Gross once said were necessary to such natures, though their radii pass through the lowest gulfs of human misery to the opposite heights. Coquetry is not only cruel to others, but to itself, in the physical tortures which it endures for the sake of an uncomfortable fashion, and the spiritual ones with which it pays for its triumphs. This was the case with the Countess. During her first unhappy marriage, she had learned to control the most despairing moods and be amusing with an aching heart. What marvel that she deemed it a matter of course that she must subdue the gnawing grief of her maternal love. So she coquetted even with suffering, and found pleasure in bearing it gracefully. She sat down at her writing desk, crowned with Canova's group of Cupid and Psyche, and wrote, "My dear husband, in my haste, I can only inform you that I shall be unable to come out immediately to arrange Josepha's journey. I have been appointed mistress of ceremonies to the Queen, and must obey the summons. Meanwhile, let Josepha prepare for the trip. I will send the directions for the journey, and the money too. Give the boy my love, kiss him for me, and comfort him with the promise that I will visit him in the Riviera when I can. Amid the new scenes he will soon forget me and cease waiting and expecting. The southern climate will benefit his health, and we shall have all the more pleasure in him afterward. He must remain there at least a year to regain his strength. I write hastily, for many business matters and ceremonies must be settled within the next few days. It is hard for me to accept this position, which binds me still more closely in the fetters I was on the eve of stripping off. But to make the King and Queen my enemies at the very moment when I need powerful friends more than ever would be defying fate. It will scarcely be possible for me now to come out as often as I promised you today. But, if you become too lonely, you can occasionally come in as my steward, ostensibly to bring me reports. In this way we shall see each other, and I will give orders that the steward shall be admitted to me at any time, and have a suitable office and apartments assigned to him, as I shall now be unable to look after the estate so much myself. If I cannot receive you at once, you will wait in your room until your wife, freed from the restraint and duties of the day, will fly to your arms. Is not this admirably arranged? Are you at last satisfied, you discontented man? You see that I am doing all that is possible, only do not be angry with me, because I also do what reason demands. I must secure to my child the solid foundations of a safe and well-ordered existence, since we must not, for the sake of sentiment, aimlessly shatter our own destiny. How would it benefit the sick child if I denounced myself and was compelled to give up the whole of my private fortune to compensate my first husband's relatives for what I have spent illegally since my second marriage? I could not even do anything more for my son's health, and should be forced to see him pine away in some mountain hamlet, perhaps Ammergau itself, whither I should wander with my household goods and you, like some vagrant's family. The boys there would stone him and call him in mockery the little count. The snowstorms would lash him and completely destroy his delicate lungs. No, if I did not fear poverty for myself, I must do so for you. How would you endure to have the Ammergau people? And where else could you find employment? Point their fingers at you and say, "Look, that is Freya, who ran away with the countess. He did a fine thing," and then laugh jeeringly. My Joseph, keep your love for me, and let me have judgment for you, then all will be well. In love, your M. She did not suspect, when she ended her letter, very well satisfied with her dialectics, that Freya, after reading it, would throw the torn fragments on the floor. This cold, frivolous letter, this change from the mood of yesterday, this act after all her promises. He had again been deceived and disappointed, again hoped and believed in vain. All on which he had relied was destroyed. The moral elevation of his beloved wife, which would at last restore to her husband and child their sacred rights, was a lie, and instead, by way of compensation, came the offer of the position of a lover. He was to seek his wife under the cover of the darkness, as a man seeks his inamorata, he, her husband, the father of her child. No, Countess, the steward will not steal into your castle in order, when you have enjoyed all the pleasures of the day, to afford you the excitement of a stolen intrigue. Though the scorn and derision of the people of my native village would wound me sorely, as you believe, I would rather work with them as a day labourer than to play before your lackeys the part which you assign me. This was his only answer. He was well aware that it would elicit only a shrug of the shoulders and a pitying smile, but he could not help it. It was evening when the Countess's letter reached him, and while, by the dim light of the hanging lamp, in mortal anguish he composed at the bedside of the feverish child this clumsy and unfortunately misspelled reply, the folding doors of the brilliantly lighted dining-room in the Wilhelmine palace were thrown open, and the prince offered his arm to the Countess. She was her brilliant self again. She had taken a perfumed bath, answered the royal letter, made several sketches for new court costumes and sent them to Paris. She painted with unusual skill, and the little watercolour figures which she sent to her modistes were real works of art, far superior to those in the fashion journals. "Your Highness might earn your bread in this way," said the maid flatteringly, and a strange thrill stirred the Countess at these words. She had made herself a costume book, in which she had painted all the toilettes she had worn since her entrance into society, and often found amusement in turning the leaves, what memories the sight of the old clothes evoked. From the heavy silver-wrought brocade train of old Count Wildenau's young bride, down to the airy little summer gown which she had worn 9 years ago in Ammergau. From the stiff, regulation court costume down to the simple woolen morning gown in which she had that morning spent hours of torture on account of that Ammergau delusion. But at the maid's words she shut the book as if startled and rose. "I will give you the dress I wore this morning, but on condition that I never see it." "Your Highness is too kind, I thank you most humbly," said the delighted woman, kissing the sleeve of the Countess' combing mantle. She would not have ventured to kiss her hand. The dinner toilette was quickly completed, and when the Countess looked in the glass she seemed to herself more beautiful than ever. The melancholy expression around her eyes, and a slight trace of tears which she had shed, lent the pale tea, rose a tinge of colour which was marvellously becoming. The day was over, and when the prince came to dinner at 6 o'clock, she received him with all her former charm. "To whom do I owe this, Prince?" she said, smiling, holding out the official letter. "Why do you ask me? Because you only can tell." "I? Yes, you. Who else would have proposed me to their majesties? Don't try to deceive me by that air of innocence. I don't trust it. You, and no one else, would do me this friendly service, for everything good comes through you. You are not only a great and powerful man, you are also a good and noble one. My support, my providence." "I thank you." She took both his hands in hers and offered him her forehead to kiss, with a glance of such sincere admiration and gratitude that in his surprise and joy he almost missed the permitted goal and touched her lips instead. But fortunately he recollected himself and almost timidly pressed the soft curls which quivered lightly like the delicate tendrils of flowers. "I cannot resist this gratitude. Yes, my august cousin, the Queen, did have the grace to consider my proposal as specially agreeable to her. But, my dear Countess, you must have been passing through terrible experiences to lavish such undue gratitude upon the innocent instigator of such a trifle as this appointment as mistress of ceremonies, for whose acceptance we must be grateful to you. There is a touch of almost timidity in your manner, my poor Madeleine, as if you had lost the self-control which, with all your feminine grace, gave your bearing so firm a poise. You do yourself injustice. You must shake off this oppression. That is why I ventured to push the hands of the clock of life a little, and secured this position, which will leave you no time for torturing yourself with fancies. That is what you need most. Unfortunately, I cannot lift from those beautiful shoulders the burden you yourself have probably laid upon them, but I will aid you gradually to strip it off. The world in which you are placed needs you. You must live for it, and ought not to withdraw your powers, your intellect, your charm. You are created for a lofty position. I do not mean a subordinate one, that of a mistress of ceremonies. This is merely a temporary palliative. I mean that of a reigning princess who has to provide for the physical and intellectual welfare of a whole nation. When in your present office you have become reconciled to the world and its conditions, perhaps the day will come when I shall be permitted to offer you that higher place." The Countess stood with her hands resting on the table and her eyes bent on the floor. Her heart was throbbing violently, her breath was short and hurried. One thought whirled through her brain. You might have had all this and forfeited it forever. The consciousness of her marred destiny overwhelmed her with all its power. What a contrast between the prince, the perfect product of culture, who took into account all the demands of her rank and character, and the narrow, limited child of nature, her husband, who found cause for reproach in everything which the trained man of the world regarded as a matter of course. Freya tortured her and humbled her in her own eyes, while the prince tenderly cherished her. Freya, like the embodiment of Christian asceticism, required from her everything she disliked, while Prince Emil desired nothing save to see her beautiful, happy, and admired, and made it her duty to enjoy life as suited her education and tastes. She would fain have thrown herself exultingly into the arms of her preserver and said, "Take me, and bear me up again on the waves of life, ere I fall into the power of that gloomy god, whose power is nurtured on the blood of the murdered joys of his followers." Suddenly, it seemed as if someone else was in the room, gazing intently at her. She looked up. The eyes of the Christ in the Gothic niche were bent fixedly on her. "Are you looking at me again?" asked a voice in her terror-stricken soul. "Can you never die?" It was even so. He could not die on the cross. He cannot die in her heart. Even though it was but a moment that he appeared to mortal eyes in the Passion Play, he will live forever to all who experienced that moment. Her uplifted arms fell as if paralyzed, and she faltered in broken sentences. "Not another word, Prince. In heaven's name, do not lead me into temptation. Banish every thought of me. You do not know. Oh, I was never worthy of you, have never recognized all your worth, and now when I do, now it is too late." She could say no more. Tears were trembling on her lashes. She again glanced timidly at the painted Christ. He had now closed his eyes. His expression was more peaceful. The prince gazed at her earnestly, but quietly. "Ah, there is a false standpoint which must be removed. It will cost something, I see. Calm yourself. You have nothing more to fear from me. I was awkward. It was not the proper moment. I ought to have known it. Do you remember our conversation 9 years ago, on the way to the Passion Play? At that time, a phantom stood between us. It has since assumed a tangible form, has it not? I saw this coming, but unfortunately could not avert it. But consider, it is and will always remain a phantom. Such spectres can be fatal only to eccentric imaginative women like you, who, in addition to imagination, also possess a strongly idealistic tendency which impresses an ethical meaning upon everything they feel. With a nature like yours, things which, in and of themselves, are nothing except romantic episodes, assume the character of moral conflicts in which you always feel that you are the guilty ones because you were the superior and have taken a more serious view of certain relations than they deserved. Yes, that is it. Oh, Prince, you understand me better than anyone else, exclaimed the Countess admiringly. Yes, and because I understand you better than anyone else, I love you better than anyone else. That is the inevitable consequence. Therefore it would be a pity if I were obliged to yield to that phantom, for never were two human beings so formed for each other as we. He was silent. Madeline had not heard the last words. In her swift variations of mood, reacting with every changing impression, a different feeling had been evoked by the word phantom and the memories it awakened. Even the cleverest man cannot depend upon a woman. The phantom again stood between them, conjured up by himself. As if by magic, the cofel with its glittering cross rose before her, and opposite at her right hand, the glimmering sunbeams stole up the cliff till, like shining fingers, they rested on a face whose like she had never seen. The eyes, dark yet sparkling, like the night when the star led the kings to the child in the manger. There he stood again, the one so long imagined, so long desired. And her enraptured eyes said, "Throughout the whole world I have sought you alone." And his replied, "And I you." And was this to be a lie, this to vanish? It seemed as if heaven had opened its gates and suffered her to look in, and was all this to be delusion? The panorama of memory moved farther on, leading her past the dwellings of the high priest and apostles in Amergau to the moonlit street where her ear, listening reverently, caught the words, "This is where Christus lives." And she stood still with gasping breath, trembling with expectation of the approach of God. Then the following day, the great day which brought the fulfillment of the mighty yearning when she beheld this face, from which the God so long sought smiled upon her. The God whom she had come to seek, to confess. What? Could she deny, resign this God in whose wounds she had laid her fingers? Again she stood in timid reverence, with a glowing heart, while before her hovered the pierced, bleeding hand. Heaven and earth turned upon the question whether she dared venture to press her lips upon the stigma. She did venture, almost swooning from the flood of her feelings, and lo, in the kiss, the quivering lips felt the throbbing of the warm awakening life in the hand of the stern God. And a feeling of exultation stirred within her. You belong to me. I will steal you from the whole human race. And now, scarcely 9 years later, must the joy vanish, the God disappear, the faith die? What a miserable, variable creature is man! Dinner is served, and Baron Stangernois has called. Shall I prepare another place? The Countess started from her reverie. Had she been asleep where she stood? Where was she? The lackey was obliged to repeat the announcement and the question. A visitor now? She would rather die. Yet Baron Stangernois was an intimate friend. He could come to dinner whenever he pleased. He was not to be sent away. She nodded assent to the servant. Her emotions were repressed and scattered. Her throbbing heart sank feebly back to its usual pulsation. Pallid despair whispered, "Give up the struggle. You cannot be saved." A few minutes after the little party was celebrating in the brilliantly lighted dining room in sparkling sack the event of the day, the appointment of the new mistress of ceremonies.